and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick with the City of Hampton. And today we are going to debunk some very popular child-rearing myths. My guest is our Healthy Families consultant, Alvean Lyons. Welcome.
Thanks. Good morning.
This is fun. And this is a big topic. So we're going to break it up and talk about the littler kids first. So that's what age?
0 to 10.
Okay.
So from infant stage all the way up to your elementary, finishing up your elementary years.
And these are things that you hear when you're doing education out in the community that people generally believe.
Absolutely, and it goes even beyond that, because if you were to Google some of these, you'll see them pop up all over the internet. So there are certainly things that people think are always going to be their experiences based on what they've heard other people say, so anecdotally, and then on top of that, some of their own personal experiences. And if it happens to you, you just believe it happens to everybody.
That's right.
And that's not always the
right.
case. So we're going to debunk a few of those. We're going to examine a little bit and then talk about how we can approach some of those seasons a little bit differently, so our outcomes potentially could be a bit different.
Okay.
But each of them is unique.
All right, so myth number one is actually one that you and I talk about a lot.
Absolutely.
Which is good parenting comes naturally, I know how to do it, and I don't need any help.
That's exactly right. And people
Or
really,
I should.
Yep.
And then if I do, there's something wrong with me.
People really feel that way,
They
that
do.
it's just something that you're supposed to know. You know, that if you are a human being, if you have a beating heart, if you have a thinking mind, somehow when this baby comes into the world, you're going to know what to do. And that is so not true.
What else in the world do we know how to do without instruction?
That's exactly right. I mean,
People had to help us learn to walk, ride a bike,
talk,
drive a
reach for things appropriately,
Yeah.
not burn ourselves sometimes.
cook.
You know,
You
the
don't know
whole
how to
nine.
cook naturally.
Some of us are grown and don't know how to cook. You know, so the reality is, there's nothing that we just automatically know. Now there are instincts. Of course, we have human instincts. You know, we're able to do certain things just by virtue of our DNA, how we were made up. But where parenting is concerned, that didn't come in the DNA. You know, there's some of us who are a little better at it than others.
And there are some people whose instincts might be better because their models, their parents were better, or they did learning
Right.
by helping with younger children or by babies. You know, there are other types of learning they may have done.
It's absolutely true. And the point that you make in terms of the models that they had, it's incredibly important. We talk about it all the time. What you see creates what we call your default zones, the places that you instinctively go to. You know, so if you spent your whole life in an environment where you had a really engaged parent, or both of your parents were very engaged in a perfect world, you know, and you had those parents who were at every soccer game and every basketball game and every cheerleading, you know, experience. I mean, you might have had that. You could have had the mom who could afford to stay home and be there for everything from the first time you sneeze to the first boyfriend you break up with, whatever it is. But most of us did not have that.
We had great parents, they weren't perfect parents.
Absolutely. And quite frankly, even if you have those parents who are completely accessible all the time, they have their own imperfections.
And is that right? And have they taught you to be
independent?
You know, right.
Right. So it's true. I mean, the reality is that there is no natural way in which we all go about what we go about. We are responding to the experiences, the influences, the lack thereof, all affect the way that we're going to orient when we become parents. So to think that you're going to have it all as soon as you have a child is just unrealistic.
It is.
And it's really okay to reach out to others, to find out more information, to get the support that you need, to participate in classes, to ask questions. That's completely appropriate. Quite frankly, that's what makes you a good parent, that you will do whatever it takes to be what you need to be in order to create the best little human being you can, rather than to get caught up in ego that you should know, and as a result, you do not try to learn anything new, and you just operate with whatever you have, which can really be disastrous, quite frankly. So
to you and to the child.
That's
it's
exactly
gonna be
right.
frustrating.
That's exactly right, because we just don't know it all. So we've got to give ourselves permission to be okay with the fact that we're not going to be perfect at this, and we're kind of all in this thing together in some way or another. So let go of that myth. You don't have to know it all. You're not going to know it all, and that is actually what is normal and true. So we're going to, you can wipe the sweat off of your brow. It's okay. It's really, really okay.
Okay, so that was number one. Number two is, speaking of two, The terrible twos. The terrible twos are horrible.
And people are convinced that every kid is going to go through this stage where it's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. You have this adorable little kid, and all of a sudden they go to sleep one night and they wake up this little monster, and that is not true. It doesn't have to be like that. Now, what is important to know is that the twos, we always call them the tiny teen years. It's that first time where they try to establish independence, and sometimes that will to try to do your own thing. You know, you hear more often than not, I do it myself. You know, like they want to make things happen for themselves. They're supposed to. That's actually a great thing that they're figuring it out. You were going to say something.
Well, I always called it the terrific twos because it was
Right.
absolutely my favorite time because you get this tremendous personality and force. And it's only terrible if you try to restrain it and confine it and dictate it because that's not going to work.
You are so right about that.
Enjoy
Anything you
it.
try to stuff.
I mean, you have to
will-
manage
Oh, of
things and their
course,
behavior
of
in
course.
public and all that, but
Oh, absolutely. And knowing that they're going to go through these stages, much like for those of us who have older children who are now young adults, knowing that there are going to be stages where they're forging their independence. You don't have to fight against that. It's like working against gravity. You know, it's going to happen, but it doesn't have to be terrible. And that's the thing that people don't always realize, that this process, the letting go, the asserting your independence, the thinking for yourself, the having your own opinion, because that's what's happening at 2. Now they have their own opinion.
and see, I think that's great.
It
But
really
it is
can
harder.
be.
It is harder because it is much easier to feed your child than to let your child feed himself,
Absolutely.
and then have to clean up after, or let your child try
Absolutely.
to do something helpful that makes an absolutely, giant mess. It is harder. It is more work, and I think
more time.
sometimes, we don't have the time or the energy or the patience
to go through
let
that
some of
process.
happen.
Absolutely. So what we attempt to do is over control. And in our over controlling, they rebel against that over control. And you get the extreme emotions and the, tossing things and throwing yourself on the floor and all of that. I mean, there's what is going to be true, which will be true all of your child rearing years, is consistency is going to be important. You're going to have to establish those things kind of early. So if you say no, it is no. If you teach them that you say no and then they flip out and then you say yes after that, then you're training them to respond negatively in order to get what it is that they want, because
Right.
they know
Because
they
gotta
can wear you down.
You don't
That's
wanna teach
exactly
that.
right.
But you pick your battles. I mean,
It's true.
my oldest child, when he was 2, started this pirate phase, and he wore black rubber boots every day of his life, like for 5 years. And you can't, you got to let some things go. You can't fight about
Right.
everything, or you're not going to survive.
It's true, and quite frankly, we'll see it again in the teen years. Where so like just know that these are the tiny teens. You're going to get the bigger ones later. So how we respond to these, knowing in advance that you're going to go through something, often makes it a little bit easier contextually. Now that doesn't mean that you're not going to have the same feelings, because you will still feel the frustration
Yes,
sometimes.
yes.
You will still feel, when you're that mom in the grocery store and it's your kid that is, creating all of the soundtrack for the grocery store. Like you're going to have those moments. There's no question about that. But how we respond to those has a lot to do with how they turn out long term. Whether or not we do train our kids to continue these behaviors, whether we teach them that these behaviors work exactly the opposite of what you want, you're going to get less of what you want by behaving like that. So there are certain things that we can do that make those twos, so to speak, far more terrific and less terrible. And the other thing is to know that it doesn't always happen exactly at 2 either.
Right.
Developmentally, our kids go through their processes at different stages. So you may see that at 18 months, or you may see that at 3.5. So it's not so much about 2, just wait. When you get to that stage, it's going to be horrible.
Or the belief that it will end when they turn 3.
Oh, absolutely. That's not
Don't
true
count
either.
on that, yeah.
Yeah. So just understand that this is part of the development. What's happening in the twos is the first establishment of independence. That is part of what you want. You don't want to always be carrying this child. When they're 6, you don't want them on your hip still. So you want them to establish this process or to go through this process. But you have to know that you're leading it. So how you lead it is often going to affect how it turns out. So it doesn't have to be terrible, but we definitely have to do a better job in orienting to those spaces. So that's our myth 2.
Okay, so Myth 3 leads nicely out of the terrible twos, and the myth is it's always the wrong thing to bribe your child.
Right.
You should never do that.
You should never, ever, ever do that, is what they say. And the truth is,
and that's a real change, because I think before that there always used to be this reward system, the
Right.
chores and the grades and all that kind of stuff.
and the truth is that incentives do work, but they cannot be your primary way of orienting to your child. Sometimes
We overdid it. You're
right,
saying. Okay.
absolutely. Sometimes we overcorrect. So first you're getting nothing no matter what you do, and now you're getting something for everything.
And if you don't do it, you don't just do it for your own reward.
Absolutely.
For yourself, you do it
Which
only for whatever the prize is.
Right, which has to be part of the process, because you're not always going to get rewarded for every good thing that you do, but you're still supposed to do good things. So if we train our kids that it's always about what you're going to get out of it, that has some negative repercussions in the long haul. But it is true that there are periods of time that bribing is totally appropriate. If you think about it more in terms of incentivizing.
Right.
Most of us are motivated by incentive in some form or fashion. Some of them are exterior, some of them are interior, but they're still incentives nonetheless. Well, if we use those right with our kids, okay, hey, for this short-term thing, and they work more effectively in the short term.
Okay.
So, for instance, your kids are little, you need to go to an event. You need them to sit quietly through the event. You know that's going to be tough to do. It's an hour long, they're only 4, But to say, hey, if you can make it through this, Mommy's going to take you to do so and so and so. So you're motivating the child to be on their best behavior for a short period of time with a reward for that particular behavior, without it necessarily being every time you do something, here's what you're going to get. So all your good behavior is based on what you're going to get. Well, think about what elementary school is going to look like. You're not always going to get the sticker. You're not always going to get the pat on the back. Sometimes you're going to have to do a good job no matter what happens. Sometimes you're going to have to make the right choice, even when it's not going to be the popular thing with some of the other kids. But you still have to do the right thing, knowing that the reward moves from outside to inside. That sense of, this was good. I helped somebody. I got nothing out of it, but seeing somebody else be happy gave me something on the inside that was a reward. So the truth is that there's a balance between those things, but it's not always a bad thing to bribe your child. But you have to be able to know when to use it and only use it sparingly so that it is effective in those periods of time.
And I would assume it is also different based on the different ages.
Right.
So it is with the younger kid, very short term, very,
Absolutely.
I absolutely have to do this. I will get down on the floor and play with you if you let me, I need to make this phone call though,
Right.
or whatever
Right.
those kinds of things are.
Right.
And then later, maybe it does get a little longer term. If you finish your homework, with the time, I used to do this with my kids. If you can do your homework rather than procrastinating, then the extra time we will play a game.
Absolutely.
But different kinds of things, because there's incentives in the workplace, there's incentives in school, the whole accelerated reader program, it's built in, so they need to learn how to respond to incentives, but they also need to learn how to develop their own incentives.
Absolutely.
You can't give them to them all the time.
All the time.
But that
because
doesn't mean you
that
can't
motivates
ever do
it differently, so that's absolutely true. It's knowing when to use it, using it short term for specific kinds of things, so it is not the foundation of your entire parenting process, but that you are using it when you need to use it for the right kinds of things. So always is not true. It's not always bad. It's using it properly that makes it different. So that takes us through that myth.
Okay, the other one, and this one is really a myth that I had held to, so it's really hard for me, but it comes from that generation that parented by saying, because I said so. Here's why you have to do it, because I said so. And the 60s and Dr. Spock came around, and you want your children to learn to question. So because I said so is bad parenting.
Not
according to the
necessarily.
myth. Not really? Okay.
Absolutely. Okay, so it is true that we want to provide understanding for our kids, because we want to make sure that when they are not with us, when they are independent of us, that they are making the right kinds of decisions when we are not there to tell them that I told you to, so you do it. So understanding is fundamental to the success of a child as they're navigating in other social spaces. But there are no questions about the fact that you have to, as a parent, establish authority. Some things are not up for negotiation. Sometimes you do what you're supposed to do because I said so. That it really is quite that simple. We are not going to talk about whether or not you're going to bed at 8:30. That's the time you have to go to bed. We have established that this is what you need. We know that you are cranky every morning if you don't get proper sleep. We know that. We know that it can set the whole trajectory for your day. You know, you're sleepy in class, we're having issues at school. We already know these things. And sometimes we're not going to be able to sit down and have a full length conversation about everything. We're doing this because of A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Sometimes there's not going to be the opportunity for that. If you tell them, you know, don't smack your sister. We're not going to negotiate on that. That's not up for negotiation. But Mom, I said, don't smack your sister. End of discussion. There's just, that is it. So there are certain moments that it's important to establish. There are boundaries. We know what's right and what's wrong. We've clearly defined what's right and what's wrong. So let's not assume that to be the case. We have defined certain things within our households.
And I think that's the key difference that you're talking about. So it's a reason that you've already explained and you don't have to explain again right
Absolutely.
now. It's not a reason you're unwilling to share. It's not an authoritarian dictatorship.
Right.
It is asked and answered, stop, move on.
Right, moving on, absolutely. And there's certain things in terms of safety, because if we don't establish some boundaries, if we don't establish authority, if everything's up for negotiation and questioning, what happens when there's a situation where I need you to do what I said that you were to do? Because this is your safety that is involved here. We're not going to discuss why we need to move quickly out of this space right now. Mommy said, let's go. So it's let's go, not I want to keep playing with my toys, I want to keep talking to my friends. There's a safety issue involved right here, and we need to go. So when we create these environments where everything is, I've got to do a 10-minute lecture, I have to explain, I must give my hypothesis, I must, if you create that environment, then it does not leave you the kind of punctuation that you need to put on certain things at certain times, because we need to make this decision right now, and we're not going to discuss it. Now, we can't discuss it here. That doesn't mean that you can't come back to it later.
And say, here's why I needed you to move quickly.
Absolutely, because I have certainly, I have adult children now and a teenager at home. We have certainly had experiences where right now, you do what I said I need you to do. Later on, when we come home, we are in a safe zone, we're in a quiet place. It was inappropriate to have that conversation in front of that person or those people, wrong time, whatever it might have been. You respond to what it is that I need you to do. Then we come home and you can ask me, Mom, why were you so serious about we had to go then? Or why did you say no and there was no discussion about it? And then I can explain to you, because these things were going on, honey. What you didn't understand was the following. And sometimes when Mommy speaks or Daddy speaks, that's the end of the discussion. You can come home and you can ask us the question later, and I'm more than happy to provide as much understanding as appropriate for you in that environment. But if I speak as a parent, it needs to be respected as a parent. So it is okay to take that hard line sometimes, because there is not going to be negotiation over every single thing that you don't agree with or you have a different perspective about as a child. So, and you will need that as they as they get older. And if you don't establish it when they're young, you don't get to reestablish it when they're older, not easily. It's not impossible, but it's really challenging when you've built an entire foundation of a relationship dynamic, and then you want to create a whole new building on top of a different foundation. Like, those two things may not go together very well. So you end up having to break it all the way down to the studs, if you follow the analogy, but break it all the way down and rebuild that thing, when it would have been easier, if you can, to build it from the beginning, so that everything else that you put on top of it, it makes sense to your kid because they understand authority. And reality
and they need
is,
to understand authority.
I was just going to say that.
Not just parental authority.
That is absolutely true, because when we start even looking at, in our communities, youth violence, if we don't teach our kids that they need to respect authority at home, believe me, someone else will teach them to respect authority, and perhaps in ways we don't want them to outside. There are consequences that will take place, and we don't want that. It's not to say that there aren't times where they're innocent and things can happen the wrong ways. We're not saying that that's not true, but we are saying universally, assuming good people in proper positions, when someone says to you, ma'am, you need to move, sir, you have to go. This is not a safe zone. That's not up for discussion.
Right.
You move. This is not the space you need to be in. This could be a crime scene. Who knows what it is?
Well, yeah, and a lot of it is safety related.
Absolutely.
Teachers and, a lot of what they do in school is fire drills, but
Right.
you do drills because you could have a fire. You could have
Absolutely.
to evacuate. There could be a
Absolutely.
problem, and your kids have to understand that.
And the
And,
fact that
I
it's an
found that
adult, yes.
They listen to other authority figures a little,
Better than
but
they
that's
do at
good.
home sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing.
It's not the worst thing.
It's
that's
not
right.
the worst
It's
thing.
not.
I mean, we want our kids to respect us, but it's even more important. If you're going to, and we used to always say when our kids were younger, if you're going to act up, do it at home and behave out in the street, okay?
Exactly.
So if you're going to respect authority anywhere, we want to know that you're going to do it in places that those people don't necessarily know or love you. So I want you to do the excellent thing when mommy and daddy aren't around, because I don't know how that person is going to respond to you. But at home, if you're going to question anything, question it at home. Let's talk about it at home.
Right.
But if someone says no out in the street, then it's no. And move on, call me, come see, whatever you need to do. But I want you to respect the authority because it keeps you safe. 9 times out of 10, it's going to keep you safe. And like I said, caveat, assuming that it's a good person in the right position.
Right,
Because we do have
right.
people who have sometimes abused those things, so we
Oh,
are not
yeah,
ignoring
we do.
that.
Right.
But we are saying good person, good position. We want to make sure our kids respect that authority. And it starts at home.
Okay. A lot of these myths, I think, come about as overreactions
Right,
to past
right.
trends in parenting. And so,
It's true.
We go too far in the opposite direction. And you're saying there's a middle ground here
Absolutely.
that makes sense.
Absolutely. And it's healthier. It's a much healthier space for us. It's the same thing with when teams, first only one person got a trophy and everybody else was left out. Now everybody gets a trophy for everything. So if you sneeze, best sneezer on the team, you get a trophy. That's not real. So we don't want to overcorrect to the point that we're handicapping our kids. Halfway in between those two spaces is a healthy zone that allows our kids to both figure out who they are, but simultaneously respect who we are. There's a space in there that is really good for us, generally speaking. So we want to make sure that we're operating in those spaces.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And thank you for watching. I hope you've learned a little bit about the myths of parenting. And I do want to say, back to myth 1, we all know how to do it. We come out of the womb instinctively. Not true. And if you go to hampton.gov/healthyfamilies, you can find a lot of tips, classes, workshops, things that you can do to help you focus on your parenting and strengthen your parenting skills. Thanks for watching.